Hello everybody. I've got the privilege of moderating. My name is Kasumu. I'm a TV presenter and producer with Channels Television in Nigeria. And it's a great honor to be here and to see all our faces, to know we're all well and alive. It's been a very difficult year globally for everybody with the coronavirus and back here in Nigeria, the NSAS movement all over the country. So it's been a tough year. So I'm really glad that we are all well and alive. This is the end of October. What a year it has been. So I've been instructed to make sure we start early and therefore finish as early as possible, as quickly as possible on schedule. So it's important that we get things started immediately. I'm sure those who still want to join us will come in as we go ahead. It's better this way rather than waiting for the crowd to come in. So let's get started. This webinar is themed working together to end the book Famine for people with print disabilities. We have a host of panelists who are going to be looking at this subject and taking questions as we go on. But to get started, we'll have welcome remarks by Gertrude. I apologize if I pronounced that wrongly. I likely did. I'm really sorry. She's the president, ICEVI Africa. I'm hoping she has joined us. Are you there? I can't seem to see her. I don't think she has joined us yet. Okay, but in her absence, I'm going to invite Mr. John Asane, who is the DG Nigeria Copyright Commission, to just give a few opening remarks to get us started. Sorry, I'm pouncing on you in her absence, but I'm sure you are more than capable of doing this, Mr. Asane.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks everyone. I just need to be guided now, so I know how many minutes we've got, so that we'll have enough time for the presentations.
Yeah, the opening remarks is just for about 3 minutes.
Well, I was supposed to be doing 10 minutes, but that's fine because the real essence of this is to have the discussions and be able to address some of the questions. Just a quick one to say that when Nigeria ratified the Marrakesh Treaty, along with 3 other treaties in 2017, there was a firm commitment, and Nigeria did say then that it was going to ensure that all its treaty obligations were met. And I think there's a kind of statement that most other countries that have since ratified Marrakesh would have made at that point. Incidentally, in the case of Nigeria, and I will just use Nigeria as illustrating, and in the case of Nigeria, we've recently had the president, His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, sign the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act. Now, the treaty that led to this act was about 2 years ago. We had the president sign the bill that brought about the implementation or the domestication of the treaty. Now, for me, that's very instructive because most people would want to know where Nigeria is, for instance, having deposited the instrument of ratification where we would be. And one thing I would say is that the bill has been able to draw from the experiences of different countries and different stakeholders. And I'm happy that we're having this discussion today, and we have the publishers with us, and we have the blind community with us, and hopefully we'll have the authors and some other interest groups listening in. That is what I find as the convergence of stakeholders that would eventually strengthen whatever instrument we are able to develop to domesticate and implement the treaty. Now, the 18 African countries that have either ratified or acceded to the Marrakesh Treaty, that's including Cote d'Ivoire, which will have it come into force December 2020. We are at different levels of domestication and implementation. So this webinar is a welcome opportunity for countries across Africa to share experiences and learn from one another as we explore ways of addressing the book famine. And I will say here that we are very much aware that it's not enough to ratify a treaty. It's not even enough to domesticate that treaty. Very often, the challenge is in the actual implementation of what has been domesticated. Recently, the Nigerian Copyright Commission had an experience working with the Nigeria Association of the Blind and some other stakeholders under the WIPO ABC project. And we got to see the huge gap, the knowledge gap that exists at the moment amongst the critical stakeholders and the players who are going to drive what will be the domestication of the Marrakesh Treaty. For instance, most publishers are still struggling with understanding the very rudiments of Marrakesh or what the whole accessible book format is about. So I think there must be a commitment to continue to deepen knowledge amongst publishers, amongst the potential trusted intermediaries, amongst the right owners, because there's this fear that when you provide books in accessible formats, then you'll be losing something. And I'm sure that this webinar today will begin to show us why it's indeed an advantage rather than a disadvantage for everyone. And I think the domestication of the treaty is going to be a win-win for everyone. Now, the recent COVID-19 pandemic and the increasing dependence on remote and online learning has further underscored the need for legislative and administrative interventions. The peculiar challenges facing the blind and other print disabled persons on the one hand, and the reality of the new normal for publishers call for a constructive reappraisal of the entire knowledge ecosystem and the role of copyright in it. The interests of owners and users of copyright works have to be addressed in a manner that guarantees the sustainable growth of both sectors. So we believe that in addressing the book famine, and I'm sure we have wonderful experts that will throw more light on this, the urgent need to promote cross-border exchange of accessible formats is very important, but at the same time, we must pay attention to the peculiarities in our different countries and ensure that in implementing, we do not lose sight of the immutable principles that were so well outlined at the point of negotiation, and they've now become part of the treaty. And these are in the preambular statements of the Marrakesh Treaty. So I believe that at the back of our minds, as we begin to discuss, at least we meet the expectations of the opportunity, accessibility, and effective participation of everyone. Two, the complete development of persons living with disabilities, particularly persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled. Three, the need for freedom of all persons to seek, receive, and impart information without discrimination. For the use of the copyright system as an incentive and reward for authors, and at the same time, a tool for everyone to participate, to leverage on new information and communication technologies for the benefit of all. These are in the preambular statement of the Marrakesh Treaty. So, I mean, I'm not reinventing these objectives. So I look forward to concrete outcomes that will elaborate on these and guide us in our search for functional, inclusive, and sustainable knowledge systems that are supported by efficient copyright laws, bearing in mind the very objective of the first copyright legislation, which is for the encouragement of learning. I look forward to a wonderful session in the next 1 hour or so, and I believe it will be a rewarding session that will help us in crafting the way forward in Nigeria and many other parts of Africa. Thank you very much, Moderator, and back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Swain. Thank you very much. You successfully matched the welcome remarks I wanted you to make on behalf of Gertrude with the keynote remark after them. So that was excellent. But she's here now, and I think we should invite Gertrude to just say a few things. We missed you earlier on. I'm sure probably network challenges you had earlier on. So please, Gertrude, you owe us a welcome remark. Are you ready? We can't seem to hear her. Is it just me?
No, we don't hear. Gertrude, you need to unmute.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And sorry for the technical hitch. I'm
No
so
problem.
excited. And with all protocol observed, we'll say that our dear panelists and distinguished, you are most welcome. We, as the International Council for People with Visual Impairment, find this opportunity very critical because our mission is to seek for inclusive, equitable, and quality education for all persons and categories of visual impairment. And you'll agree with me that access to published works is a barrier globally and very much so for Africa and Nigeria. So that is why we are excited and enthusiastic that we and our partners are working to end this famine, book famine, so that published work will be available to all people, including people with visual impairment, at the same time as others. At this point, on behalf of ICVI, Global and Africa, I welcome you and thank everybody, particularly the panelists and moderator, for your time. We are looking forward for a very exciting and educative session. Thank you again.
Thank you, Gertrude. Thank you very much for that brief, nice welcome remark. We're really glad you eventually popped in. Thank you. Now let's get to the panelists right now. We are adopting a self-introductory system. So I'm going to be asking each of the panelists to just introduce themselves before we get into the nitty-gritty of the discussion. And the format will be, I will ask each panelist certain questions and they will have some time to respond. Meanwhile, for those of us, ladies and gentlemen who are listening, please feel free to throw in a question. You can do that by typing into the chat room. We'll look out for those questions and then direct them to the appropriate panelist or the entire group. Somebody might be keen on responding. So let's get started with the introduction of the panelists. So I'll first of all ask Hugo Setzer to please introduce himself very briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Kasumu. My name is Hugo Setzer. Currently, I'm a publisher in Mexico City and currently the president of the International Publishers Association. So that's the reason why I have this iconic Mexico City monument here on my background, but the offices of the International Publishers Association are based in Geneva, Switzerland. So the IPA is the most important federation of publishers associations. We have 83 associations as members of IPA in 69 different countries. And our main areas of interest of work are copyright and freedom to publish. Although We work also very much on inclusive publishing and accessibility, and we'll be speaking of this, of course, this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Brad Turner, I'd like to invite Brad Turner for a self-introduction.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much. It's exciting to be here. I'm coming to you from San Francisco, California, as the Vice President and General Manager of Global Literacy for Benetech. Benetech, we believe that access to information is a fundamental human right for all people, and so, regardless of disability. So we use technology to drive lasting social change so that anyone can learn and work and pursue their dreams. Many of you may have heard of Bookshare. It's our best known initiative. It's the world's largest library of accessible content for people with a print disability. And so we've been talking about blind and visually impaired, but also we work with people who have a learning disability like dyslexia or a mobility impairment that prevents you from using a printed book. Through Bookshare, people can download any one of 750,000 books, each of them available in 5 different formats to support different types of disabilities so that those people can read in ways that work for them.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Brad. Thanks for that introduction. I'll also like to invite Richard. I have a feeling I might not pronounce this well. Richard Orme. Orme?
Richard Orme. Orme is fine. You can leave the A off the end. That's fine.
Richard.
Thank you. No problem. So that's the advantage of inviting people to introduce themselves. They can say their own name. So hello, everyone. My name is Richard. I'm Chief Executive at the DAISY Consortium, which is a global organization whose mission is to develop standards and solutions for accessible publishing and reading. Personally, I'm a founding member of the Publishers Association Accessibility Action Group. I also serve on the board of the Accessible Book Consortium, which is an initiative of the UN agency called WIPO. I'm a director of the Regional Blind Association in the county in which I live. My brother James has a severe learning disability and my son Jim has dyslexia. So with these different professional roles and family connections, I'm regularly interacting with individuals with print disabilities, but also with regulators, publishers, technology companies, special libraries, and people, importantly, who want to read books and other publications for their work, study, or pleasure. And I've got so much more to say in the nitty-gritty section, to use your terminology. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for accepting to be a member of this panel, and thanks for the introduction. I would like to invite Danlami Basharu for a self-introduction.
Thank you very much. My name is Danlami Basharu, and I am currently chair of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and also director of the Anglo-Nigerian Welfare Association for the Blind, which is a non-profit organization that caters for the education and welfare requirements of blind and visually impaired persons. So we provide training in rehabilitation, in braille reading and writing, mobility and typewriting, computer appreciation, library services, as well as guidance and counseling for blind persons and their parents. More importantly, we undertake transcription of print matter into braille for blind persons from primary to tertiary education, as allowed by Section 22 of the Nigerian Copyright Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Danlami. Thanks for that introduction, and very nice to have you here. Our final panelist is Dr. Fred Shoeder. I don't think he has joined us yet. He is the president of World Blind Union. I was informed before now that he will be joining us a bit late because of an unavoidable engagement. So he'll be joining us very soon. So let's get into using my favorite expression, the nitty-gritty. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. I'm going to start with Danlami Basharu with a question. Each panelist has averagely about 5 minutes to respond to each question. So you may want to use the entire 5 minutes, you may not. It's really up to each one of us. But the first question is, how does the right to read fit within broader human and disability rights regimes? How does the right to read fit within broader human and disability rights regimes?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, the right to read, in fact, has been recognized even even recognized from time immemorial, I should say, even in the holy books, that recognize that reading is an essential aspect of life and enjoined adherence to read and understand. Quite apart from this, several international and regional treaties guarantee the right to read for all persons, including, of course, persons with disabilities. Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, states that everyone has the right to education, and that is an adjunct of a right to read. This right is recognized in all major international and regional instruments guaranteeing the right to education. So the 1990 World Conference on Education for All ensures that right for all, regardless of individual differences. The United Nations Standard Rules on the Equalization of Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities, the Salamanca Declaration of 1994 recognizes that every child has a fundamental right to education, etc. So all regional instruments also recognize this fundamental right for all persons, including persons with disabilities, whether in Latin America, Europe, the ASEAN region, and the African Union itself specifically has a protocol on disability that recognizes the right to education of persons with disabilities. UNESCO, as the United Nations Agency for Education, has been doing a lot to promote a reading culture in all regions. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is the first legally binding international instrument that recognizes the right of persons with disabilities to education. Not only does Article 24 of the Convention recognize the right to education, it recognizes this education should be qualitative and inclusive in nature. Article 24 recognizes that this right should be provided in necessary formats of reading for all persons with disabilities. Thus, state parties shall facilitate the learning of Braille, and alternative scripts, augmentative and alternative modes, means and formats of communication and orientation, and also the learning of sign language. It is now left to us to promote a reading culture among blind and visually impaired persons in the mode most convenient for them. So we wholeheartedly welcome the Marrakesh Treaty, which has recognized the need to open up the book industry to take account of the millions of blind and visually impaired persons who are left out. However, it must be emphasized here that Braille is one of the most important mode of reading for the blind, regardless of the significant contributions that technology makes to the lives of blind and visually impaired persons. We need to teach our children how to spell, how to recognize punctuations and sentence constructions. Thank you.
Thank you. Danlami Basharu. That was right on point. I was just about to notify you of time, and you just rounded up. So that was perfect. Thank you very much for that brilliant contribution. The next speaker is Brad Turner. The question is there sufficient demand for books by people with print disabilities around the world? Is there sufficient demand for books by people with print disabilities around the world?
So it's a great question, and I would almost turn it around to say, is there sufficient demand for books around the world? Because whether you have a print disability or not, you not only, as we just heard, you have the right to read, but you also have the desire to read. Just because you are blind or have a learning disability or have a mobility challenge doesn't mean that you don't have the desire to read. And at Bookshare, we see that every day. There's tremendous demand for our books. We serve 1 million members in 95 different countries around the world, and that's just the very beginning. There are about 300 blind and visually impaired people around the world. There are hundreds of millions of people with severe learning differences like dyslexia or with mobility challenges. A vast majority of children around the world, especially in developing nations and especially in Africa, a vast majority of children with disabilities never attend school. Does that mean they don't want to read? Does that mean they don't want to be able to pick up a book and get the story of that their mother told them, or that their mother's mother told them, right? The cultural learning is so important, and it doesn't matter whether you have a disability or not. So with the people that have disabilities and want to read, they struggle to get the accessible content. We at Bookshare help schools and governments provide accessible books so that students who have the ability to get to school can study along with their peers. Once they show up at school and somebody hands them a printed book, it doesn't help them. If we can get them a book that they can read, all of a sudden they have the ability, the capability, and the desire to study right along with their peers. But I submit it shouldn't stop there either, because we just established that many of those children never get to school. So we help eligible children at home get access to content. The COVID worldwide pandemic really illustrated that whether you're at home or at school, it's important you get content. There were 1.6 billion children out of school back in April. During that time, people came flocking to Bookshare because all of a sudden they realized that they could get books that may have been provided to them by the school, but now they were home or in a different situation. As I mentioned in my introduction, we provide books in many different formats. We provide, of course, an industry standard publishing format. And I'm gonna look at Hugo and watch him smile and nod when I say our key format is EPUB, which is the global standard for publishing. But we also do provide books in Braille. Every book that we have comes in Braille, in an audio format, in Microsoft Word for a screen reader, for someone who's using a technology to read what's on their screen. And in one of my favorite formats, which was designed by Richard's organization, a DAISY format called, I like to refer it as ebook karaoke. The word highlights as it's read to you. So you get the audio and the visual at the same time. So we supply a lot of different formats to support a lot of different students with disabilities to almost any standard device. Here's the thing. If a country ratifies and implements the Marrakesh provisions, we can add 100,000 new books into that country. 100,000 new books in each of those 5 formats. So 500,000 different reading options for people within that country because of the implementation of the Marrakesh Treaty, the ability to do cross-border transfer. So Marrakesh opens the world of books to people in a country through cross-border transfer. Imagine that, thousands of people hungry to learn, but without the most basic educational building block, which is a book. We see it all over the world. There's huge demand for books. Absolutely. The answer to your question is yes, there's massive demand.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ratona. Thank you. That was really insightful. It's amazing how countries can open up if this treaty is effected. 500,000 options. Wow. We'll get back to you, but let me go to Richard now. The question for you, Richard, is how does the Marrakesh Treaty interface with existing copyright laws? How does this treaty interface with existing copyright laws?
Well, I like the way the guy who's not the lawyer gets the legal question. So I'm not a lawyer. So this is from the perspective of a layperson, but maybe this also means that the answer might be understood by non-lawyers. So I'm giving a layperson's response that maybe is not so technical in legalese. I think how I would phrase this is to draw out some things that maybe people might be surprised to learn about from what the Marrakesh Treaty brings. So one element is the Marrakesh Treaty is not just for blind people. You know, the title of the treaty is the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled. All around the world, there are organizations working hard to create, for example, Braille versions of books for people who are blind. But the world of people with print disabilities is broader than those who are blind Braille readers. And so that's the first point I would make, that this establishes a kind of common baseline for countries that have ratified and implemented the Marrakesh Treaty to ensure that everyone in those countries who has a genuine and qualifying print disability is able to make use of these accessible books. I mentioned in the introduction to myself, my son who lives with dyslexia, he is able to make use of accessible books. The people who receive the services from my local blind organization, which I serve on, who read with Braille, they're able to use accessible books. And the older person who lost their sight late in life, who never learned Braille, she is able to read an accessible book through audio. And Brad explained this in the way that Bookshare store titles. You can make a book accessible once, and it's available in many different ways by many people with different reading disabilities. So it's really efficient. And, you know, to the point about let's not forget Braille, technology, in my view, is the savior of Braille. It will make more Braille available than we've ever seen in history, because people are able to access, if they are able to, using a more affordable Braille device, or that file can be used to create a hard copy version. So the Marrakesh Treaty is not just about blind people, it's about people with print disabilities, including those with learning disabilities such as dyslexia, but also with a physical disability, like, for example, my auntie who had multiple sclerosis, and she was unable to hold a book or turn the pages. Were she still alive now, she would be able to enjoy the books that are produced, for example, by Brad's organization. So there are people in Nigeria, in other African countries, and all around the world who have been denied the right to read, have been experiencing the book famine, and they will also be able to get it because the Marrakesh Treaty interfaces with copyright exceptions that exist, but also makes sure that there is a 21st century interpretation of what we mean by print disability. And I've mentioned that the treaty isn't just about Braille, it's about these other formats too, accessible formats, such as audio, such as large print, and of course, Braille too. And at the DAISY Consortium, we talk about this as reading through your eyes, ears, and fingers. So to be able to read with vision, if you're someone with low vision that could not read a regular print book, and I have friends who've told me that they used to have a nose with ink on it because they will hold the newspaper up to their face all the time to read it. But by making the text larger, they're able to hold it at a comfortable distance, and maybe they'll change the colors too to make it easier for them to read. So reading with eyes, but also ears. So you can use the technology to have the book read out to you with the voice. And if you're low vision, this is a great way to read. And maybe you can make the text really big and listen to it as well. So you have the experience of reading with your eyes and your ears. And reading through your fingers, as I mentioned, through a book that has been printed in Braille, or you're reading on a Braille display. And I've worked with hundreds of students and people in work who use the combination of reading on Braille, but also listening to the same piece of information they're reading, and that makes for a very, very effective way of being able to navigate through content. And reading, accessible reading, isn't just about learning and school, it's about employment too, and access to employment is so important. Let's think about professional education, vocational education, and being successful and competitive in the world of work. And the last thing I'd say is that what Marrakesh Treaty brings and interfaces with existing copyright law is that this isn't about just the content that happens to be in your country, because the Marrakesh Treaty allows for the import and export across national borders. Building accessibility into the publishing process itself is very affordable. But making special versions after the fact, retrofitting accessibility, is in fact inefficient and it's expensive. And often the production of these accessible books after a book has been published is done by government organizations or non-profit organizations with real limited resources and limited access to funds. So it's really important to make sure we don't waste this precious resources and these limited resources. So when a book is made accessible after the fact, we should make sure it's only done once. And there have been many examples in the past where a book has been made accessible, turned into Braille or into electronic text 13, 14, 15 times. That's 13, 14 books, that other books that could have been made accessible. So the Marrakesh Treaty allows for the cross-border exchange of accessible titles, but with rights come responsibilities. So the treaty sets out appropriate checks and balances to make sure the books are used in appropriate ways and only for the benefit of people with qualifying print disabilities. So this is my answer as a layperson. It's not just about blind people, it's about people with print disabilities. It's not about one format, it's about accessible formats in all ways and not to the detriment of single one. And it's about, again, dealing with this global challenge, the global book famine, as a global family, enabling the appropriate cross-border exchange of accessible titles.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you. Very, very insightful. Thank you. Let me go to the president of the International Publishers Association, Hugo Setzer. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being so patient. I was tempted to call you first, but I just love that thing behind you. So, all right. Yeah, Hugo, the question for you here is it true that the Marrakesh Treaty is an enemy of the publishing industry? In some circles, this has been it's an idea that some people hold very dearly to. Is it true that the Marrakesh Treaty is an enemy to the publishing industry?
Thank you. Thank you for asking this question, because it gives me the opportunity to say that not at all, nothing farther from the truth. And thank you for asking the question, because I know that unfortunately this is a myth that I've been hearing. I've been hearing a long time, and it's definitely not true. I mean, we as publishers were there in Marrakesh when it all started in 2013. We were there supporting the treaty and have been supporting Marrakesh ever since. It is true, and perhaps here I'd like to say, and that might be cause of the confusion, that publishers, we are usually concerned about copyright exceptions in general. We know that exceptions are important, that some exceptions should be there, like the one established by the Marrakesh Treaty, for example. But we are concerned of the abuse of very broad copyright exceptions. We have seen, and it's not the subject of today's panel, but we have seen some very concerning examples where exceptions have been abused and have caused great harm, not only to the publishing industry and to our authors, but to society in general. So I'll not go into that, but just mention that that's definitely not true, that Marrakesh, it's an enemy of the publishing industry. We have embraced Marrakesh since the beginning. We have been working together with the World Intellectual Property Organization to try to get Marrakesh implemented in different countries. Now we know that Marrakesh has been implemented in over than 100 countries. We're very glad of that. We have been speaking with our publishers associations all over the world to explain them why this is important, why they should be also backing their own legislation to implement the Marrakesh Treaty into their own legislation, and why this is important to ensure that we don't discriminate any person for whatever reason or for any impairment they might have, to be able to read the books we publish. So, and there are many other areas we cooperate with the World Intellectual Property Organization and with the organization that Richard also mentioned, where I'm very glad to be able to sit on the advisory board together with Richard, which is the Accessible Books Consortium. But I think we'll be talking about that a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hugo Setzer, thank you very much for that. So it is not for those who have been wondering, it is not an enemy of the publishing industry. Okay, let me ask Dr. Fred Shoeder, who has now joined us. Thank you, welcome. Great to see you, great to have you join us.
Thank you.
May I invite you to please do a very brief self-introduction and then respond to this question that I have here for you. What is book famine and how serious is it? All the panelists have introduced themselves very briefly, and we're happy you're joining us. So please kindly do a brief self-introduction and then respond to this question. What is book famine and how serious is it?
All right. Well, thank you and good afternoon to all of you. First, let me congratulate Nigeria on ratifying the Marrakesh Treaty. It will create opportunities for enhanced literacy for people in Nigeria at a truly amazing level. So my name is Fred Schroeder, and I am the president of the World Blind Union. I live in the United States, and the World Blind Union represents the interests of the estimated 253 million blind and partially sighted people around the world. When I say represents the interests, that's very broad, and it's deliberately very broad. It could be the interests of blind people as far as access to education. And of course, the Marrakesh Treaty has enormous implications for education, but also for employment, for community integration, all of the issues that to one degree or another impede the full integration of blind and partially sighted people around the world. So the book famine, this is a term that was coined in the early 2000s, and it really had to do with the fact that we were falling farther and farther behind. The estimates, probably the most optimistic estimate was that blind people had access to roughly 2% of published works. And I say that it was a very optimistic estimate because it depends a little on how you define access, but clearly blind people had very limited access to published works. And as I said, this has implications for education and for employment. And as was earlier said, one of the confounding factors was that copyright laws being at the national level meant that accessible books produced in one book, produced in one country. I'm going to turn off my speech on my phone, excuse me. I hear things chattering and it distracts me. And I'm not particularly articulate even when not distracted. So there you go. So, you know, as was said earlier, if you have a national copyright exception that allows a book to be produced, that's great, but it could not be shared. So here in the US, we could not share books with Canada, which, you know, literally across the border from us. In practical terms, if you had a book that was very popular, and let's just use a simple example like the Harry Potter books. So the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, there are approximately, according to the UN, approximately 60 countries, 60 countries around the world that have English as at least one of its official languages. So potentially that book had to be produced 60 times. Now, it rarely was produced. Any book was produced that many times, but the waste of resources when you're talking about a very limited resource, this is huge. So the Marrakesh Treaty allowing that cross-border sharing is certainly very efficient, and it allows for much greater access. But let me quickly touch on a couple of related points. Another problem with the book famine is that for many kids, and my friend Danlami talked about this, access is most cheaply created through audio recordings. And while that gives you access to the content, it is not supporting full literacy. It doesn't support the ability to read and write and spell. We need Braille for that. And the number of blind people around the world who have access to good quality Braille instruction is very limited. And so we look at the Marrakesh Treaty also as a way of supporting Braille literacy. So for example, we, meaning the World Blind Union, engaged in a project about 8 years ago now to try to make a significant change in the cost of refreshable Braille displays. At the time, a refreshable Braille display was, most of them on the market were between $5,000 and $6,000 US, putting them very much out of the reach of people in the developing world. And we created a consortium called the Transforming Braille Project, which developed a new technology that allowed a Braille display to be produced for approximately $500 US, or 1/10 the cost. Now that was the beginning, not the end. What that has meant is competition in the marketplace. There is at least one other, perhaps several other low-cost Braille displays that have come onto the market. The traditional Braille displays have been brought down significantly in terms of cost. And really our goal is to get refreshable Braille devices down to a level where the device is literally disposable. So if you have a blind child in a very poor country, if you were to spend, well, let's go back to the old model. If you were to spend $5,000 and you sent this child a Braille display, knowing that with the Marrakesh Treaty, now the child would have access to literally thousands of books, and that Braille display breaks, where is the infrastructure to repair it? The Orbit reader, which we helped develop, is getting closer to that. $500 US is still a lot of money, but literally, that is what it would cost to take a pressed Braille, that is to say paper Braille textbook produced in the US. A single textbook runs about, depends on how large it is, et cetera. But $500 is now the cost of sending one book. Now we send a Braille display coupled with the Marrakesh Treaty, and that child has access to thousands of books. So the book famine was really intended as a short way of expressing that blind people had very limited access to published works, and we needed to address it, and the Marrakesh Treaty was the vehicle for addressing the book famine.
Thank you, Dr. Shoeder. Thank you very, very much for that extensive response to the question. Thank you. We'll be back to you very soon. So we've finished this round of questions, and we've got one more round before we go to the Q&A session. I can already see some questions being posted. Thank you. Please keep them coming. There's a Q&A section where you can type in. But I've noticed some people are also chipping in things in the chat room. So no problem at all. We'll try and see how many of them the panelists can address. Let's go to the next round of questions, and I'm going to start with Danlami Basharu. How is the UNCRPD committee holding states accountable in promoting the rights of people with disabilities in relation to the Marrakesh Treaty? It's quite a mouthful, but I'm sure. Let me, just for the sake of somebody who might not have heard me very well, let me repeat that question. How is the UNCRPD committee holding states accountable in promoting the rights of people with disabilities in relation to the Marrakesh Treaty? Is Danlami Basharu still there? Can you please unmute, sir?
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, yes, we can hear you now. We can hear you now. Oh, you have muted again. Can you kindly unmute?
Hello.
Okay. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. So the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is comprised of 18 members who operate on an independent capacity, so they have no relation to their country. Now, the job of the committee is to receive reports from states parties on how they are implementing the convention within their various states. Now, after country dialogues with each state party, the committee prepares a list of recommendations which is sent to states parties to guide their implementation policies. Article 30 is the article of the convention that guides the committee on the Marrakesh Treaty. The committee considers the treaty as a very significant instrument, and in virtually all dialogues that we hold with states parties, the committee probes the various states parties on how they are implementing the articles of the treaty. Article 30, subsection 3 provides that states parties shall take all appropriate steps in accordance with international law to ensure that laws protecting intellectual property rights do not constitute an unreasonable or discriminatory barrier to access by persons with disabilities to cultural materials. The committee recommends to all states the need to ratify and implement the Marrakesh Treaty. And even if states tell us that they have ratified, we want to know whether they are doing what is expected with regard to implementation of the treaty in their territory and to support the book needs of their blind and visually impaired members. So definitely the committee is holding states very, very strongly accountable on the Marrakesh Treaty.
This word he, in this word he, I've underlined H in red, but up here I underlined it in blue.
Sorry, there's some interruption.
There it's underlined in red, that means I must pronounce it H. I have to pronounce it when it's...
Hello. Yeah, thank you. So like I was saying, the committee holds the various states parties to account on the Marrakesh Treaty. We want to know whether they are implementing it and whether they have actually domesticated it so that it can be operational in their country, because some countries do not allow international treaties to become part of their constitution automatically. So in conclusion, actually, I think we need to find ways of tackling the book farming for blind persons all over the world, particularly here in Nigeria. We're very lucky that our National Copyright Commissions, the National Human Rights Commissions in every country, and particularly in Nigeria, have to give regard to the Marrakesh Treaty by encouraging their states to domesticate and begin to implement the treaty. We must also ensure that every blind person has some level of Braille education. Audio is equally as important as Braille. So we need to advocate for low-cost smartphones to enable blind and visually impaired persons to have access to the printed matter. And we're very lucky that we now have a low-cost device that we can use, such as the Orbit Reader. Sorry. And we also need the support of publishers to be able to have books in various formats. And we're very happy that the International Publishers Association president has given us his word that this will be so. We need publishers to support the Marrakesh Treaty so that books can be made accessible and available for all blind and visually impaired persons. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Danlami Basharu. He appreciates your response. I will have to call on Hugo Setzer now because he has to leave for a very important engagement. I'm sure he will explain that very soon, but he needs to leave very soon. So I want to crave your indulgence to bring him up next. Apart from the question I had prepared for you, sir, there is a question in the Q&A section that I think you'll be keen on responding to. So I will add that to what I'm about to ask you. The question is, how is the International Publishers Association contributing towards ending the book famine and securing the commitment of publishers to accessible publishing? I suspect from an implementation perspective, this might be a bit tricky for the IPA, but perhaps there's an easy answer to that. So how is the IPA contributing towards ending the book famine and securing the commitment of publishers to accessible publishing?
Okay, should I go and answer that one, and then we answer the one that came through? Okay.
Yes, please.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think it's also a very important question. And as mentioned before, we are fully supportive, definitely, of the Marrakesh Treaty. However, we think the treaty itself is probably not enough. That's why we started together and under the leadership of the World Intellectual Property Organization and with other stakeholders like the DAISY Consortium, the World Blind Union, and the authors and the copyright management organizations and the librarians. So we started with all those stakeholders, this organization, which is called the Accessible Books Consortium. And one of the aims and objectives of the Accessible Books Consortium is to promote that more books are published in accessible formats. So we have taken this very seriously. We have worked with our associations, with publishers all over the world to explain to our publishers why this is important. I mean, that's probably not something we need to explain very much. I mean, that is very, very quickly understood why it's important. There are rather more technical questions about if this will be something that will be expensive for publishers to implement, for example, and so on. So we have been working together with the ABC Consortium in having, for example, seminars, regional seminars, and explaining to publishers all about this. There is one important instrument to that is called the Charter for Accessible Publishing. So, and that is a commitment for publishers to support accessible publishing and to publish their books in accessible formats. So we have been working, as mentioned, with our members throughout the world, explaining them why it is important to sign this charter. We have now over 100 publishing companies all around the world who have signed this important commitment to publish their books on accessible format. And Richard mentioned something which I think is very important. Then one of the aims of this is to make books born accessible, that we don't have to use a book that has been already published and transform it into accessible formats, but rather include accessibility into the publishing process, into the production process of a book. And that is something we have been also explaining and working with our members in order for them to know that it's not meant to be more expensive. It's not meant to be more time consuming. It's something we definitely should embrace and use in our production processes. So that's in general terms what we have been doing. There's a very nice anecdote about when we had a regional seminar in Mexico City, sponsored by the Accessible Books Consortium, that we had a meeting apart from the seminar, we had a meeting with a very important, with a large Mexican publisher, and explained to him during this meeting the importance of signing the charter. And well, I think we hadn't finished explaining. He took out his pen and said, well, where do I sign? He didn't even have to think about it. He signed right there. So, well, that's about the things that have been happening, and that's what we are doing to promote that we have more books on accessible formats.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me quickly throw in the second, the question from the chat room, from the Q&A room. It starts with a challenge, by highlighting a challenge. So I'll start with that, and then it follows up with a question. And this is a challenge, a critical challenge of leveraging the advantage of the Marrakesh Treaty is the limited resources for developing and least developed countries to produce accessible format copies of reading materials for their domestic needs. So that's the challenge. Now the question is, how much synergy exists among the international publishing community to address this challenge, especially in this group of countries where the challenge is more acute? I hope it's clear.
Yeah. I think that's definitely an interesting question, and it has to do with a couple of things. One of those is what we just explained, that it takes much less resources to start having a book born accessible from the beginning than to transform it later on. So that's something we have been working with our publishers, also in Nigeria and in Kenya and in other places and all around the world, to see that publishers will be able to publish their books from the beginning with those accessibility standards. And then there's another interesting thing when we speak about perhaps the lack of resources in some countries, which is an important provision of the Marrakesh Treaty that Dr. Shoeder mentioned, and that's the cross-border provision of the Marrakesh Treaty. So there are already, for example, the ABC Consortium, and Brad also mentioned about what they have available for visually impaired people, and the ABC Consortium has also a repertoire of I can't remember right now, and I'm not sure if you remember, Richard, how many titles there are already there. I'm not sure if it's 500,000 titles or something like that, but there's a lot of them already there. There's many more to be published still. I'm very aware of that, but that's part of what we're doing.
No, you.
Thank you, Mr. Hugo Setzer. By the way, that question was from Michael Apan of the Nigeria Copyright Commission. Brilliant question it was, and the response was equally brilliant. Mr. Setzer, I know you have to be off very soon. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the insightful responses, and have a great rest of the day and the rest of the year.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very sorry I have to leave. I have to go yet to another panel. I'm moderating right now, so that's the reason I have to leave. But best of luck for the rest of this important seminar. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Mr. Setzer is the president of International Publishers Association. Thank you, sir. Bye. Now, the next question, we're back to Brad Turner now. So we've got a question for you. How is Bookshare ensuring availability and easy access to quality, accessible books by people with print disabilities, including those in undeserved and low-income communities? I'm not sure which communities are undeserved, but how is Bookshare ensuring availability and easy access to quality, accessible books by people with print disabilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. We believe that the most important books are the locally relevant titles. We have about 950,000 books in the collection. Again, each of those available in 5 different formats. But someone in Nigeria might not care about a famous American story about a boy going down the Mississippi River. Just doesn't matter nearly as much as the local folklore, the culturally relevant titles in Nigeria, the education curriculum in Nigeria. So the way we ensure availability and easy access to quality books is first to build the collection. And of course, we come in with a huge collection of books from, all different countries. But again, we then work with local publishers and local volunteers to create that corpus, that collection of locally relevant titles. So that's sort of the most important piece of it. But we've been talking about Marrakesh as well, and I think the Marrakesh Treaty is a huge part of that. With the implementation of the provisions of the treaty, all of a sudden we can work with organizations right there in Nigeria to create accessible content. That could be publishing. That could also be just the conversion of books that exist already. So we train volunteer organizations to convert those books into accessible formats, and then we bring those into the Bookshare collection, and we take that one format that they've converted into, and we multiply that by 5, so that it comes out in Braille and in audio and in EPUB and in DAISY, and so it comes out in all the different formats. So we work with local organizations. We work with local publishers, and Hugo, who just left, said that it's important for publishers around the world to understand about born accessible. If a book can be born digital, and they all are, it can be born accessible. And so we work with publishers, and we've launched about a year ago, we launched a program called Global Certified Accessible, where we actually, it's a training program for publishers to help them learn to publish books that are accessible in the first place. If it's published accessibly, it doesn't need to be converted. And as it's been established earlier, I think Richard mentioned it, it's much less expensive to create it in an accessible format than it is to retrofit it once it's already published. And so working with publishers, the important part about that is as we put books into the Bookshare collection, whether they're culturally relevant books or the educational titles, we are adamant about protecting that copyright for those publishers. And so I don't want people on the call, or whether they're eligible people who are looking for books, or whether they're publishers who are trying to figure out how to implement with Marrakesh here, don't think that Marrakesh releases their copyright to anybody who wants to get a book and they're just giving their book away for free. That's not the way it works. That copyright, what the Marrakesh implementation means is that copyright is protected around the world in those countries that have implemented the Marrakesh, other countries that have implemented the Marrakesh Treaty, and so your copyright protection is valid in the other 100 countries that have ratified, and their books' copyright is protected in Nigeria. And so, and Bookshare is, we take that copyright protection incredibly seriously. We fingerprint every book that we send out to someone who has a disability. We put a hidden watermark in it so that we can go find it if we need to. We ask people to click through a form, sign a form that says they will only use this for their own personal use. We verify a proof of disability for everybody who comes into the collection. So we're very, very protective of the publisher copyright, but in exchange for that, we work with 1,000 publishers to bring books into the collection. So we put about 10 to 12,000 books per month into the collection and then convert those into multiple formats. So any format people need. The question, also revolves around how do we help those in underserved and low-income communities. So if you're in a community that doesn't have internet access or that doesn't have power all the time, we've worked really hard to be able to support books on a bunch of different devices, whether it's a computer or a low-cost Android phone or a refreshable braille display like the Orbit reader, or even an MP3 player. You can go to a village, you can get access to the internet, you can download a few books, you can walk away, you can read those books whenever you want. When you're done with those books, go back to the village, exchange those books for something else. There's a device that's put out by one of our partners in Australia that has a solar charger on the back. So it's a device that's about this big. You put 30 books on it, you walk away. It never needs to access power because it has a solar charger. You listen to the books as many times as you want. And then as soon as you're finished with those books, you can go back and refresh your book display. You don't need power. You don't need access to the internet. So you can read on a connected or disconnected fashion. So we do, and there were a couple questions in chat. We do work with volunteers. We do work with publishers. We work with publishers to help describe images, to add descriptions for math equations. It's for us. I don't care how you read. I don't care what you read. I care that you read. And so whatever different devices, whatever different accommodations we need to make, whatever format you'd like, we try and provide that.
Thank you very much, Brad Turner. Thanks for that response. Let me go to Richard next. This is the last bend. Two more questions for two panelists, and then we'll go to the Q&A very briefly. We're actually running a bit behind schedule, but I think we'll be good. Richard, your question is, how is the DAISY Consortium promoting the publication, production, distribution, and utilization of accessible books and other content?
Very nice.
How is the DAISY? Oh, okay, you got.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll happily answer that question, and maybe I can respond to a couple of questions I've seen in the chat and in the Q&A as we go along. That might be helpful. So first of all, I should explain about the DAISY Consortium. So more than 20 years ago, libraries that are serving blind people, they combine their efforts to develop common technologies and tools. And in fact, in many countries around the world, many blind people would know of DAISY because they will have enjoyed talking books and newspapers in the DAISY format. But beyond developing the DAISY standard, the consortium has a much bolder mission, which is to ensure equal access to information and knowledge, regardless of someone's disability. And so our consortium is not just our 15 or so team members, but more than 150 organizations that are part of our movement, including special libraries for visually impaired and other print disabled people, disability organizations, government agencies, publishers, lots of publishers, universities, and technology companies. So that's who we are as a kind of family. And so what are we doing as a DAISY Consortium promoting the publication, production, distribution of accessible books and content? So as I mentioned, we develop technical standards, and having an international standard is essential. We've talked a lot about cross-border transfer. So an organization, an appropriate organization in my country could send a title maybe to a reader in Brad's country, but unless we're adhering to these international standards, a qualifying person wouldn't be able to read it because it would be a format that they're not familiar with. So we have these international standards and tools to create the books that mean that an international framework can actually function. So at the DAISY Consortium, not only we develop the standards, but we produce software programs as well for the production of accessible books. And the software we produce is used by really big technology companies and publishers who are right at the cutting edge, all the way through and across the spectrum to small non-profit organizations working out of a bedroom making accessible books. Our software programs can make audio, digital books or Braille. The software is free. It can be localized into your local languages, and it's accessible for people with disabilities too. So this means that blind people are making books, for example, that could be read by someone with a physical disability. And so we support publishers and specialist organizations with training and technical support as well. We've run many training events. This actually comes from our training team that themselves are based in a developing country, supporting non-profit organizations, publishers, government organizations on the latest efficient technical technologies to make accessible books and read them as well. And this training is always evolving because the software changes and the reading tools change, but we supply that practical knowledge so that people can create accessible books, and also then maybe over the next year check that the books they're creating are conformant with those standards that I mentioned. This training would include, for example, the training on how to do the accessible diagrams. And I noticed the question in the chat there. Are there techniques for creating accessible versions of illustrations and diagrams and charts that will be found in particularly education content? Yes, this problem's been solved, and publishers and non-profit organizations are building the accessibility of those images into these books, so then those images are accessible to someone who's reading through their ears or reading on Braille or reading through something that's been produced as a Braille copy. And these accessible books, to answer another question, absolutely are of use to people who are deafblind. Once you have made a book available in an accessible digital form, it can be read in all these different ways I mentioned. I had the privilege actually introducing several people who are deafblind to technology, and the difference of them being able to access the tiny number of Braille books that were available to them before, to being able to get access to a library such as a Bookshare, where the choices aren't made for them which books they will read. They've got access to the books that really, for the interests that they follow, those to be able to get access to that. We have a phrase, it's like being in a sweet shop or a candy shop. To have all of that choice is just amazing. So many of the organizations that we support with this practical training, whether they're a publisher who just wants to create good quality books for everyone, people with disabilities, but can also be read by people with without disabilities, all the specialist organizations, these are producing books in EPUB and in DAISY, and these can be read on a smartphone, on a computer, on a special device, and so on. So these are the different ways that we are supporting people in the DAISY Consortium. And being a consortium, we're a family of organizations, and so there's a lots of knowledge exchange and exchange of best practice and sharing that happens within our organization too. So as well as the training, we are that kind of network for people to be able to just ask questions of other organizations that are like them. This is what we're up to.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. Appreciated. The last question goes to Dr. Fred Shoeder. How is the WBU, World Blind Union, ensuring that people with print disabilities around the world enjoy the benefits of the Marrakesh Treaty?
Well, thank you for the question. It, I think, touches really on the heart of what the World Blind Union is about. So the Marrakesh Treaty is just that. It is a treaty. Countries ratify or adopt the treaty, but beyond simply advocating for the legal adoption or ratification of the treaty, the next most powerful step is then the implementation. And we have provided a tremendous amount of training materials to our members on how to advocate for the full implementation of the Marrakesh Treaty. In other words, getting that implementation at the national level is absolutely critical for the treaty to achieve its goal. And I know we're running very short on time, so let me just end by saying, again, I'm quite sincere when I congratulate the Nigerian government for ratifying this treaty. By ratifying the treaty, you have done far more than simply given access to a novel or magazine to help someone pass his time of day. This is really key to the education of blind children, which will lead to the greater employment of blind adults, which will not only help benefit the individual blind person, but will strengthen society more generally. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Shoeder. Thank you. I think you might still have a question to respond to, but perhaps let's do it this way. I've got a few questions here. I will just throw them open to the panelists, maybe not direct them particularly to anybody. So please, panelists, if you feel like responding to any of these questions, kindly just take it up. So the first one here is, what happens to a country that has not ratified the treaty but wants to get books in accessible format from international publishers? This question is from Jagadish Ariel from Nepal. My apology if I did not pronounce your name well. I'm really sorry. What happens to a country that has not ratified the treaty but wants to get books in accessible format from international publishers? So I'll throw that open. Then a second question is, how can readers in developing countries access materials in libraries such as Bookshare, CNIB Library, and others? Why are those collections password protected even on reading devices if the Marrakesh Treaty allows for cross-border sharing? Okay, so that's a second question. And then let's throw in one more. Let's throw in one more question. This is actually a comment. Okay, let's reserve the comment for now. Let's, panelists, please, the two questions. Is anybody keen on taking up any of the two questions?
Hi, it's Brad. I can jump in. Bookshare has books from two different sources, and I just touched briefly on this. One of them is from scanning under a copyright provision. So, like the Marrakesh Treaty, we have scanned 100,000 books that can be available to any other Marrakesh ratifying country. We also have books from publishers that we get directly from publishers. They give us permission to convert those books into accessible formats, and then we can distribute those books anywhere in the world. So there are countries that have not yet ratified the Marrakesh Treaty that can still have access to those publisher books from us, but not the scanned titles. So our publisher collection is about between 500 and 600,000 books. the Marrakesh titles would add another 100,000 books. So Jagdish's question, what happens to a country who has not ratified the treaty but wants to get books in accessible format? Bookshare is available around the world. I mentioned we have members in 95 different countries. For those countries who have not ratified the Marrakesh Treaty, we still can bring publisher books into those countries. For those that have ratified, the collection grows. It's just larger in ratifying countries. So that's one way to do it, is to make sure that you know, if you look at www.bookshare.org, or in Nepal, it's nepal.bookshare.org, and you can see the collection that's available in those countries.
Great, thank you, Brad. Thank you. There's one here for you, though. I think it's specifically directed, you know, at you. Thanks to Bookshare for the wonderful work to help people with vision difficulties. Good work you're doing. Is there any possibility for exemption of the $5,000? Believe me, for some countries that might be like a real barrier. Or at least, is there any organization that could cover the costs?
Yeah, this question is focused on the creation of a Bookshare library in a country. I just mentioned nepal.bookshare.org. We have established a number of national libraries, like Kenya.bookshare.org. And we just, as a matter of fact, we just launched one in South Africa, which with Blind South Africa, Blind SA, and that library is blindsa.bookshare.org. We work with organizations in different countries to build a local library. We translate the interface to the local language so that people aren't looking at a American English website. They have it in English, but they also have it in a local language, and that gives them access to the collection, whether it's the publisher books or the publisher and Marrakesh books together. We require funding to work with those organizations to build that library. In turn, then we turn around and make the books available, especially in the global south and developing nations. We make the memberships, the access to the books, available for anybody who can come to that library. So, there's no way to exempt the charge for the library, because it costs us money to do that work as well. But we do make it free for the individuals to access once they get to that library. And so, you know, we work with governments, we work with nonprofits, we work with philanthropy organizations, we work with multinational organizations to try and get that funding for the different libraries, the libraries in the different countries. Great,
thank you for that. By the way, the question came from Mohammed Salah Eldin Mudawi. I wish he would know from which country, but I mean, great. Well, I mean,
let me jump in now. Maybe I can respond to the question that came from Opielu, which was about the password protected. Maybe Brad could answer this better than me, but he doesn't have to do all the work. So the reason why the libraries for Bookshare and from CNIB and other libraries are password protected, even if you're using a reading device, is because of this this issue that Hugo and Brad have referred to, which is these are copyright works, and this is a copyright exception, the Marrakesh Treaty, that makes sure that they're available to people with print disabilities, but only to those. So there needs to be some way of ensuring that the person who's getting access to those libraries, CNIB and Bookshare and so on, is actually someone who qualifies for it. So this is where people with print disabilities need to work with organizations in their own countries to make sure that there's an appropriate qualification method there. in order for them to be able to demonstrate that they are eligible people for access to these international collections. If there was no password there, then people without print disabilities would be able to get access to this amazing body of work that's been produced by these hardworking authors and publishers, but actually it's there for people with print disabilities. This is why there are special checks and balances in place. This is living proof and living the message about organizations that are operating in this space being legal organizations, responsible organizations, and working in partnership with rights holders because we're dealing with their precious intellectual property.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We are running out of time, so we might have to put a pause here now, but not until after this. Dr. Shoeder, I think there's a comment here that I would like you to respond to. Let me read this comment. It's quite interesting, by Anthony Hulula. Braille is seen as too niche and not viable for mainstream commerce. I think Anthony is trying to say that the niche is quite small. You know, it is true that a minority of blind people use Braille textbooks, and so while it is vital for our literacy needs, it is easier to understand why, from a business standpoint, publishers do not consider Braille to be viable. It is therefore reasonable to conclude that, at least until now, the publishing industry has largely ignored print disabled people as a market segment, having deemed us to not be a commercially viable customer group. This is a very common question, issue in Nigeria particularly. So I would like you to say something about this before we round up.
So that is a very good point. And this explains why publishers have not undertaken to produce hard copy Braille historically. I said earlier that, for example, a single Braille textbook could cost $500, and that's if it's produced by a nonprofit organization. It's not from a business standpoint viable to create hard copy Braille. However, this concept that we've been talking about this afternoon about being born accessible, and that Brad has talked about several times, that if the accessibility is built in at the front end, it allows that material to either be produced in hard copy Braille. That, of course, still requires a publishing or printing house facility, but more and more commonly using a refreshable Braille device. So in other words, that same accessible text that's being used with I don't know, we used to call them MP3 players, whatever they're called now, but you could play the material through audio format or use screen enlarging software if you have low vision, but also to be able to display that material in Braille. And we feel very strongly, we talk a lot about Braille, even though a minority of blind people use Braille, because it is so fundamental to education and to employment, and by extension to community integration.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Thank you, panelists. You've all been brilliant. Thank you. And to our guests, quietly listening, sending in questions. Thank you very much. Conveners, Nigeria Copyright Commission, Nigeria Association of the Blind, International Council for the Education of People with Visual Impairment. Thanks for putting this together. Thank you very much. But actually, I would like to invite, for a very brief closing remark, the president of Nigeria Association of the Blind. Mr. Ishiaku Adamu, thank you. Mr. Adamu, I'd like to invite you for a brief closing remark as we round things up now.
Thank you, host. Thank you, everybody. My name is Ishiaku Adamu, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody, particularly the panelists and our organizers, for putting this great event today, this afternoon here in Nigeria. We really appreciate your efforts. Let me start by thanking the DG of Copyright Commission, Nigeria, Mr. John Ascent, for his relentless support all this while, right from WIPO to the Publishers Association in Nigeria and now in NCC. Has been quite supportive, quite wonderful, and always pushing and trying to see that we got it right in terms of the accessibility to published materials in Nigeria. We remain grateful to you, sir. And we also thank Mr. Martin Katie, a friend of the Nigeria Association of the Blind. He's always with us, and for his wonderful support all the time, not only in this aspect, but in all other aspects in the association. He's always in the country whenever we are requested for his support, whether physically or virtually, whatever. Mr. Martin, we remain grateful to you. And also our panelists, the president of the World Blind Union, we remain grateful to you, sir, for your wonderful presentation. Isevi, we also remain indebted to you for everything you have been doing through the process of the ratification of the Marrakesh Treaty in Nigeria. You have been quite wonderful. You people have been quite supportive, the African office and the international office. We remain grateful to you. We also thank our Chairman Education Committee, Mr. David Okon, who has been very wonderful, up and doing, to see that all things are going well in terms of the ratification and now heading towards domestication very soon. Mr. David, we remain grateful to you, and we wish you many more life ahead to stay around us so that we will see, we'll reap more benefits of your efforts in the association. And if I forget any other person, please forgive me for that. But honestly speaking, we thank everybody, including the participants, everybody that come in and then that participate in this program, and also the host. You did a very wonderful job in trying to facilitate this session. It's a very wonderful effort from your side. We remain grateful. On behalf of the Nigeria Association of the Blind, we say thank you to you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Damo. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself today. I've learned a lot. I happen to host a TV program in Nigeria that is entirely about books, and books. The program is focused on the book and publishing industry. And I will be looking at perhaps showing some clips of this once I'm given the permission to do that, so that we can create greater awareness of this here in Nigeria. We've been trying to do that, and this has motivated me to do more. So we hope to work together with all of us in realizing this mission, which is very important globally. And I mean, let's get things, rolling. Let's get things rolling. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Gatona. Thank you, Dr. Fred Schroeder. Thank you, Hugo Setzer. Thank you, Richard Orme. And thank you, Danlami Basharu. And of course, Ade John Asane, who is, he's completely on a mission here in Nigeria to bring about awareness and support to the blind community, to make books accessible to the blind. What a great public servant he has been. Thank you very much, sir. So once again, thanks to everybody, and this is where we draw this event to a close. Have a very nice evening.